Hi everyone. So I thought it'd be worthwhile doing a quick video showing you how to get things set up so you can start making Laravel applications on your desktop. So there are a few ways you can do this. So if you're trying to come up with your kind of local development system, you could try and install everything kind of manually, and a lot of people do that, configuring things and like installing PHP and doing all this stuff. That can take a lot of configuration, a lot of messing about, and you end up having to change options on your computer that you probably shouldn't. The way I recommend, and I think most people would recommend, is to use something called Homestead. And what Homestead is, it's a pre-packaged virtual machine that's made by the people who make Laravel. And it's got everything you need in it. You just install it, you run it, and you work on it as if it's a server. And it means it behaves more like a real server would. You can just test things and browse to things in your browser, and it's easy. You don't have to mess around with lots of settings in your in Windows or whatever your OS is. It's all kind of nicely in that virtual machine. So I'm not going to go like step by step, like step by step by step, but I'm going to show you kind of the basic flow of how you get this installed, because a lot of it is just downloading and clicking install. And point out a few places where people often make some mistakes. Now, the documentation is actually really good. If you go to Laravel and go to documentation, I think it's one of the real strengths of Laravel, actually. And then getting started, and then you click on Homestead, and they've got all the information you need to get Homestead installed. But, you know, sometimes, like, I found this a little bit confusing when I first looked, so it was good that I had some colleagues who had done this before I could talk to. So I'm trying to recreate that in this video. So things you're going to need to get installed. Well, firstly, you need some kind of development text editor or something to work in. It's kind of personal preference, to be honest. You can use whatever text editor you like. I quite like Visual Studio Code because there's a terminal that I can have straight there in the editor. It's got some cool snippets for Laravel, some cool like extensions, that have Laravel snippets that are worth looking at. So you need something like that installed. You're going to need Git installed. Also, when you install Git, that comes with a bash terminal for Windows. So then you can actually make Visual Studio Code use that bash terminal, and that's kind of nicer than the one that comes with Windows. You're going to need something that's kind of virtual machine, and I recommend VirtualBox for no real reason other than it's the one I've always used. Now, if you use VirtualBox, you're going to need VirtualBox 6 for Homestead. One thing to bear in mind, something a lot of people come in have issue with, is that not all computers, I would almost go as far as most computers, aren't set up to run virtual machines by default. You'll almost certainly have to go into your BIOS and change some kind of setting. The setting is much easier to find in Intel machines, in my experience, than AMD, but I'm running an AMD now, and like it's totally doable. Just need to Google your motherboard and kind of figure out how to enable virtualization, and then VirtualBox will run fine. You're going to need Vagrant installed, and Vagrant is the kind of thing that enables people to make these little virtual machines in these packages and then distribute them to other people. So get all these installed. Once you've got those installed, you'll be ready to kind of go on to the next bit. And that's to install Homestead itself. Now, the way that you're going to want to do that is the first thing you need to do is in your terminal, in some terminal window, you're going to want to type in Vagrant box add, and then I'm just following here, so adding Laravel Homestead. And what that will do, and if you don't know how to paste in a bash terminal, I just right click to paste. So I Control C to copy as normal, but then to paste, I right click in the terminal, and that's how you paste. You'll feel like such a next level developer doing that. So Vagrant box add Laravel, you push enter and it will download it. It usually takes a while depending on your internet speed. So I've already got it installed, so I'm not going to do it here. And then the next thing is you're going to have to clone the Homestead repository. And again, usefully, the command you need to type in is right here. This directory at the end is the directory you want it to install in. So the way I've got things set up is on my D drive. I've set this folder that's got all my Laravel stuff in it. I've got a folder here, which is the Homestead folder, which has got the Homestead stuff to do with the virtual machine. And then code is where all the different projects I'm working on exist. And once you've cloned that repository, all these files will appear in the directory. And then what you should do is you should cd to that directory. And in fact, what I've done actually here in Visual Studio Code is I've opened the Homestead directory. So I've got all the files here in the Explorer, and it's even put the terminal in that directory for me, which is super, super useful. And then you want to make sure you've checked out the release version. You can see it's telling you all step by step how to do this. Once you've done that, you'll need to run a batch file which will create some configuration files. So you just type, you just run that. And then you'll end up kind of in the position I'm in. Now the first file you need to look at is this homestead.yaml. Yours will look different to start with, because this is how you actually start configuring things for your machine and your situation. So it's going to look something like this originally. But let's have a look what all these sections are. So this first section here is all to do with the actual virtual machine you're going to be creating. So you're defining the IP, how much memory you're going to give it, how many CPUs you're going to give it, and then the provider. So the provider for us is VirtualBox, and that means Vagrant knows to look for VirtualBox to run this virtual machine. This thing here, the folders, this is the real magic. This is incredible stuff that is just mind-blowing. If you've worked with virtual machines before, you're probably used to always having this issue of how do I get files from my desktop to my virtual machine. You might have even started using text editors on the virtual machine, which I've definitely done in the past. In the past I've used Dropbox and installed Dropbox on my virtual machine, and yeah, it gets nuts. But what this does is you can actually map a folder on your host machine, your Windows machine, to a folder on the virtual machine. So what I've done is I've put in my my code folder. If you look, I've got D Laravel stuff code, which notice here, if you're working on Windows, this is a /, not a \, because this is all working on a Linux box. So we got to put the / rather than backslashes. So I'm mapping everything in this code folder will be mapped to the home Vagrant code folder on the virtual machine. And that means when I edit stuff here, then these files are the same. I don't know how it works, but it does. It's amazing. Is all these files, I can edit them on my host machine, and it will just be updating them on the virtual machine, and it will be as if I'm editing them on that virtual machine, which is game changing. So what I usually do is I set up this whole code folder, and then every new project I'm working on, I create a new subfolder. Now it's important, before you run the Vagrant machine for the first time, that you actually make sure that this folder exists in Windows or on your host machine. Otherwise it just won't work. Now this is where we define, so that's our folders. Now what we've got here is we've got this sites section. And what we can do here is we can add new projects that we're working on. And I'm actually going to add a new one now, because I'm going to show you the process of creating a new site. So I'm going to map, and then I'm going to this is the URL that I will type into a browser on my local machine, and that will then navigate to this particular folder. Because as you know, or those of you who do my course will know, is that servers often host more than one different website. And when you do a request, part of that request will be, right, I'm looking for homestead3.test. So I'm going to map homestead3, which doesn't exist yet, to, and I'm going to copy and paste this and put in there, homestead3. So this public directory is in Laravel, the directory where all the public facing stuff is. Databases here, we have It's the name of the database basically that we'll be using, and at the moment they're all just using the same database, and that's fine. So now we've got that set up. There's one more thing we need to do in terms of configuration, because at the moment, if I type in, so if I want to go to homestead2.test or homestead3.test, if I was to put that into a browser, so I'm going to add a new tab here and type that into a browser, it won't be able to find that URL. It will look for that online because Chrome doesn't know that I'm looking at this is a local IP. So we have to actually tell Windows about that. And that's where we need to edit this hosts file. And this hosts file, if I show it in File Explorer, is in C, Windows, System32, drivers, etc. And it's this host files here. And what we can do is it's basically a list of IP addresses and URLs. So we can kind of override the DNS in a way. So I've already done it for the ones that exist, but now I'm going to add Homestead 3, which is just this URL. The IP is just the IP I've defined here. And if you notice that, you won't be able to see because of where my face is. Okay, so what you can see here is that when I tried to save it, I did Control-S to try and save it. It's saying insufficient permissions, select retry as admin. So this is one of those things in Windows that's a bit weird, that sometimes you have to do things as administrator. But it's one advantage of using Visual Studio Code is because it's by Microsoft, it's got that kind of stuff built in. So we've done all that. Everything's ready for us to launch our virtual machine. So what I'm going to do, I'm in the Homestead folder. That's important. Some people make the mistake of trying to go to the place where their website is. So we don't want to go where their application source files are. That's not what we're doing. We're launching the Homestead machine. So we need to be in the Homestead folder. So I'm going to do Vagrant up. And what that will do is it will launch the Homestead machine. It might take it longer for you, depending, because I've launched this before. So don't worry if this is taking a long time. Something else I forgot to mention actually is that if by default you'll get this in the Homestead YAML file, you will have these keys and authorize sections. Now what I recommend you do is delete those, because if you delete them, what will happen is that Homestead will create these for you, and then that helps when you SSH in, and it just means it's one less thing you have to mess around with. It's just Vagrant will do it what it needs to make it work. So it's giving us pretty good information, and so now I'm going to, it's all running. So the virtual machine is running, and if you're unsure, if you're not convinced, you can look. Have we got it? Can we see it here? Something I have done many times before is like there's now a virtual machine running on my computer and I can't really see it. And so I've often forgot to actually shut it down and started playing games and wondering why I'm getting not great performance. So let's go. So now we want to actually connect, we want to go into that machine. So we want to SSH to it. So all I need to do is type Vagrant SSH. And this is another thing that's really powerful about Vagrant and using Homestead is that it's got all that stuff stored. I don't have to mess around with setting this stuff up myself. It's great. And then I'm on this machine. So I need to actually create a new Laravel project. So I'm going to cd to my code folder. And remember, the code folder is the one that we set up linked to our local machine. And then all I'm going to do is run Laravel new Homestead 3. And then I'm going to push enter. And now Homestead and Composer, which is like a package manager for PHP, basically is now going away and like downloading all the stuff we need to get Laravel running. And it's like, you know, it's doing that for us, which is pretty neat, I think. And again, this might take a while because it's having to download quite a lot of stuff. One thing that's probably worth saying at this point, actually, and I can try and find, I've got a link that explains how to do this. If you are like, eventually you're going to want to have version control in your Laravel project and use Git or whatever. Now, a lot of the files that Composer is downloading will not be included in your version control. So if say you've pushed your Laravel project to GitHub, and then you're going on a different computer, you've set up Vagrant and Homestead and stuff, and you're downloading those files, you might be surprised when it doesn't run. That's because you're going to have loads of files missing. So you need to actually essentially tell Composer to download files and generate them as needed. So I'll find the link and stick that in the comments in the description. Okay, so now it's done. So if I do ls, we've got Homestead 3 is there. So I can cd to Homestead 3. And you can see we've got our Laravel stuff set up. And even better, if you look in Windows, I've got, if I open that, can I open this with code? Yeah. I can edit these, these files as if they were on this local machine, but they're not. They are absolutely on the virtual, they are on my local machine, but as far as we're concerned, I'm editing these on the virtual machine. And then now, if I go to type in Homestead 3, there we go. It worked. I think the reason it took long before is because it was probably doing some weird caching stuff. But here you are. Like, we're done. Like, that's it. This is running. This is a web application running on a virtual machine. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. I do highly recommend just going through these step-by-step steps in the Homestead documentation. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully after watching this video and looking at the documentation, that'll help. Now, I want to say a lot of this stuff. So I teach web development once one semester a year, and I often forget a lot. A lot of this stuff isn't stored in my memory. I often have to come to the documentation and read how to do this again, or even read my notes. I had my notes up on the screen, that I was reading as I'm doing this, because really memorizing it isn't particularly useful because things change so often. But I want to say that because sometimes you watch people do these tutorials and you think they're just memorizing everything and you're there kind of having to look up documentation and you might feel bad about that. Well, don't. Just read the documentation and I think the more you kind of go step by step, watch other people doing it, find good sources of information, and can learn from that is better than you trying to memorize how to do this stuff. But yeah, I hope you enjoy, I hope that was useful. I think Laravel is great, and I think using Homestead is great. I don't know how to describe it, but it feels good working in this way. Having this terminal, it feels closer to proper deploying your web application than, say, I've worked with ASP.NET and those things to do web applications, and that felt really clunky for testing. Whereas this, you can just make a change in a text editor, click refresh on your page, and there you go. So one bonus tip actually for those of you who've watched to the end. One problem you might find is that when you change something, when you refresh the web browser, it doesn't change, and that's because your web browser will be caching things. So you can stop that in Chrome anyway. There is a setting. Right, okay, here we go. So in this network tab, if you enable disabled cache while DevTools is open, you can just open the development tools and you're never going to be caching it, so you can always just refresh. So there you go, bonus tip. So yeah, if you'd like to see any different videos, let me know somehow. Like I said, this is part of a course at Swansea University. If you're interested in that, and you're not currently studying at Swansea University, then have a look at what we offer. We offer this as a master's year, so if you've already done an undergrad degree, you could come and work with me for a year. But yeah, thanks for watching.